Imagine the moment the woods go deathly silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just a vacuum where life used to be and then. From directly behind your left ear, you hear a breath that isn't your own. Heavy, wet, rhythmic, as if something is tasting the air you exhale. You came here to hunt, to sit in a stand or stalk a ridge, confident in your camouflage and your rifle. But tonight, 5 men and women are going to tell you about the night that confidence shattered, when the line between predator and prey blurred and then snapped. Wyatt called a turkey and got an answer that used his own voice. Keisha watched a heat signature on her thermal scope move faster than any animal she'd ever tracked. And then it stopped and turned toward her. Silas found a line of bait leading into a hollow that he hadn't set, and when he followed it, the woods closed behind him. Dominic took his son on a bonding trip and discovered that their GPS coordinates led to a clearing where something had been waiting since before the trees grew. And Roy, a veteran hunter with 40 years of experience, felt a breath on his neck while standing in an open field. And when he spun around, nothing was there, but the breath didn't stop. These are not folktales. These are their own words, and once you hear them, you'll never walk into the brush, assuming you're the most dangerous thing out there. So check your gear, listen to the silence, and let the countryside close in around you. I've been hunting whitetail and turkey in the hardwood bottoms of eastern Oklahoma since I was old enough to draw a bow. And I know every sound these woods can make: the scold of a squirrel, the distant yelp of a hen, the soft huff of a deer blowing at a scent it doesn't like. The morning of November 8th was crisp and still. A low fog threading through the oaks, and I sat up against a fallen log at the edge of a clearing with my slate call and my bow across my lap.
Oh.
I gave a series of soft clucks and purrs. Nothing aggressive, just a hen letting the woods know she was there. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then, from the thicket about 60 yards to my east, an exact copy of my last purr came drifting back. Perfect in pitch and cadence, but with a weird, hollow undertone I couldn't place, like someone playing a recording inside a metal pipe. I figured it was another hunter, maybe someone with an electronic call, and I sat tight. But then the call came again, this time from the west, and it was my cluck this time, the same sequence I'd just done, but now layered with a faint, almost subsonic vibration that I felt in my chest more than heard. I shifted, and the forest around me went utterly silent. No wind, no bird song, not even the distant drone of a plane. The fog thickened, pressing in from all sides, and I had this sudden visceral sense that I was being watched by something positioned slightly above me, as if it were perched in the branches. I looked up slowly, and through the crisscross of limbs I saw a shape large, dark, hunched, with limbs that bent in the wrong places, gripping a heavy oak branch with fingers that were far too long and pale. It didn't have a face I could parse, just a shifting blur where features should have been, but it was looking directly at me. I raised my bow, and the thing opened its mouth, a split that ran almost ear to ear, and let out a perfect, crystalline imitation of my own voice, a voice I hadn't used aloud that morning, whispering, "Wyatt, put the bow down. You're scaring the birds." My blood turned to ice. That whisper was not only my voice, but my exact tone. It's the one I use when I'm talking to myself in the stand, and I had not spoken a word since leaving the truck. The creature's jaws worked soundlessly for a moment, and then it emitted a series of turkey call yelps, cuts, even a gablal in rapid succession. As if it were running through a catalog of sounds it had learned, and then it tilted its head and added, in my voice again, "Stay until dark." It's easier then. I fired an arrow instinctively. but the shaft passed through empty air. The shape had moved, reappearing on a branch 40 feet to the left with no transition, just a flicker. I dropped my bow and ran, and behind me, the woods erupted with sound. Not just turkey calls, but my own voice, multiplied, chanting my name from every direction, overlapping in a discordant chorus that followed me all the way to the truck. I drove out with the windows up and the radio blasting, and when I got home I found my slate call was no longer in my pack. In its place was a single greenish feather, oily to the touch, and when I held it to my ear I could hear a faint, tinny whisper that still hasn't stopped. I do most of my hunting on a 200-acre lease in the piney woods of East Texas, and I'm a gear nerd. I use a thermal monocular, a GPS collar on my dog, the works. Last January, I was stalking a big 8-point buck I'd patterned for weeks, and I'd set out before dawn to catch him moving from his bedding area to a food plot. The thermal scope painted the forest in shades of blue and white, and I was scanning a dense thicket when I caught a heat signature that made me pause. It was tall, bipedal, and moving at a speed that was just wrong, not running, but gliding, covering ground in a smooth, frictionless way that suggested wheels or something with no visible stride. I thought it might be another hunter, but the signature was too large, the shoulders too broad. And when I switched to the night vision overlay, I saw only empty woods. Back to thermal, and the figure was still there. Closer now, maybe 100 yards, and it had stopped. Its head, if that's what the bright bloom at the top was, turned slowly in my direction. I lowered the scope, and the forest was absolutely silent. No crunch of leaves, no breath of wind. I raised the scope again, and the signature was now 80 yards away, and it was crouched, the heat signature compacting into a coil, like a spring. I had a rifle in my hands, a .270, and I chambered around and clicked the safety off. The thermal image then did something I still can't explain. It split.
Ow.
The single signature fractured into 3 smaller signatures, each one moving in a different arc, circling me, while the original remained crouched. I started backing toward the truck, and the thermal now showed the 3 circling signatures had changed. They were now mimicking the shape of a deer. Each one a rough outline of antlers and 4 legs, but the gait was off. The legs moving in a stutter stop that didn't match any biomechanics. I realized with a cold lurch that whatever this was, it had seen me using the thermal, and it was learning what a deer looked like in real time, reshaping its heat output to match my expectations. The original crouched figure rose, and its thermal bloom suddenly flared white-hot, as if it had opened some kind of internal furnace. And I heard a sound like a deep, resonant hum, a vibration that shook pine needles from the branches. I fired a shot into the air and ran, and behind me the hum became a multi-toned chord, harmonizing with itself. And I saw in the thermal scope one last glimpse. All 4 signatures had merged into a single, towering column of heat, easily 9 feet tall, and it was moving toward me with the same smooth gliding motion. I reached the truck and locked the doors, and the thermal screen went black, not off, but black, as if something was pressing against the lens. I drove blind for a terrifying few seconds until it cleared, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, the woods behind me were full of small white-hot points of light, like eyes, watching me leave. I haven't been back to that lease, and I sold the thermal scope. Sometimes I still feel a hum in my fillings when I'm near deep woods, and I know it's still out there, waiting for someone else with the right gear to see it first. I trap coyotes and feral hogs on a stretch of river bottom along the Arkansas-Oklahoma line. And my routine is methodical. I run a line of traps, check them every morning, and reset with bait and lure. One late October morning, I found a trap sprung and empty. Which happens, coyotes are smart, but next to the pan was a small, perfectly arranged pile of acorns, all shelled, all pointing in the same direction, like an arrow. I thought it was a prank by a neighbor kid, but when I walked to the next trap, I found another pile, this time of persimmons, and the third trap had a dead rabbit, still warm, its neck broken clean, placed neatly beside the jaws. The piles formed a line, leading away from my set and into a dense canebrake where I never set traps because the ground was too wet and the cane too thick. I should have turned back, but my curiosity overrode my caution, and I followed the line of offerings. The cane closed in around me, the stalks so dense I had to turn sideways, and the ground underfoot grew spongy and gave off a sour, yeasty smell. I heard a rustling ahead, and I thought it might be the prankster, some local kid who wanted to spook the old trapper. So I called out, "All right, you got me. Come on out." The rustling stopped. And then, from deep within the canebrake, a voice answered. It was the voice of my late wife, Mary, who had died of a stroke 6 years earlier. Said Silas, "Come a little farther. There's something I want you to see." Every rational cell in my body screamed at me to run, but my feet moved forward on their own, as if the voice was a hand tugging my chest. I pushed through the cane into a small clearing where the ground was bare dirt, packed hard and covered in symbols scratched with the sharp stick spirals, stick figures, and something that looked like a diagram of a human body with the chest cavity opened. At the center of the clearing lay a fresh deer carcass, but it had been arranged. The legs folded under it like a resting dog, the head propped on a stone, its eyes missing and replaced with 2 dark, polished river pebbles. The voice came again, now directly behind me. "This is for you, Silas. Sit and eat." I spun, and there was nothing there, but the air shimmered, a heat-haze distortion, and I felt a cold, dry hand close around my wrist fingers that were rough as bark and unnaturally long. I yanked free and bolted through the cane, the stalks whipping my face, and behind me the rustling followed, not at ground level but above me, as if something was swinging through the canes hand over hand. I burst out onto the riverbank and threw myself into the shallows, and the rustling stopped at the edge of the cane. I looked back, and between the stalks, I could see a face not Mary's. Just a crude assemblage of moss, bark, and bone that had been pressed into a rough approximation of a smile. I waded downstream until I found a gravel bar and climbed out shivering. The next day, I retrieved my traps and never set foot in that bottom again. But I still find small piles of acorns on my doorstep some mornings, arranged in an arrow pointing east, toward the river, toward the cane. I took my 12-year-old son, Ethan, on his first hunting trip to a public forest in the Ozarks, a place I'd hunted with my own father years ago. We were after squirrels, nothing intense, and I'd brought a handheld GPS to make sure we didn't wander too far. The morning was overcast and still, and we'd been walking for about an hour when I noticed the GPS was showing a waypoint. I hadn't marked a small blue dot labeled camp in the middle of a region I'd never explored. I assumed it was a glitch, but Ethan was curious and begged me to check it out, so we followed the arrow. The forest grew darker as we walked, the canopy thickening until the sky was just a gray memory, and the underbrush gave way to bare, spongy ground that seemed to absorb our footsteps into silence. The GPS led us to a clearing that was perfectly circular, perhaps 50 feet across. with a ring of white stones at the perimeter and a single ancient oak at the center, its trunk scarred with deep claw marks that had healed into gnarled ridges. The air inside the clearing was cold, noticeably colder than the surrounding woods, and it smelled strongly of iron and pine, a metallic temps that coated the back of my throat. Ethan pointed at the tree trunk and said, "Dad, why is the tree breathing?" I looked, and the bark was moving slow, rhythmic expansions and contractions, a pulse that matched a resting heartbeat. I grabbed Ethan's shoulder and started backing us out. But the GPS screen flickered and went blank, and when it rebooted, the camp waypoint was replaced with a single word: stay. I heard a sound then, a low, resonant grinding, and the ring of stones around the clearing began to shift, not rolling, but sinking, descending into the earth as if pulled from below, revealing dark rectangular voids beneath each one. From those voids, pale, root-like tendrils emerged, coiling and uncoiling. And they all oriented toward Ethan, their tips opening like tiny mouths. I scooped him up and ran, crashing through the underbrush, and behind us the grinding grew louder, the very earth shuddering. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, and Ethan was silent the whole drive home, staring out the window. That night he woke up screaming, and when I rushed into his room, he was holding a small, white stone, one of the ring stones. "I'm sure of it, Hand," he said. "The tree said, I can come back when I'm older." It said, "I'm not ripe yet." I threw the stone into a lake the next day. But Ethan still talks about the clearing in his sleep, and I've caught him drawing the claw-marked oak over and over in his school notebooks. I've reported the GPS anomaly to the Forest Service 3 times, but they claim no such clearing exists. I know better. The GPS coordinates are still in my device, and sometimes, late at night, the camp waypoint reappears. I've hunted everything from elk in Montana to hogs in Georgia, and I've spent more nights in the woods than most people have spent in their own beds. I don't spook easily. But what happened to me 3 weeks ago in a patch of public land near the Talladega National? Forrest has made me put my rifles in the safe and consider selling the whole collection. I was sitting in a climbing stand about 18 feet up a pine, overlooking a food plot that the deer had been hitting regularly. Sunset had come and gone, and I was waiting for the last legal light when I felt a puff of warm, moist air on the back of my neck. I froze. In 40 years of hunting, I have never felt breath on my neck from behind. While in a stand, there is nothing behind me but bark and open air and the fall to the ground. The breath came again, a slow, deliberate exhale that stirred the fine hairs on my skin, and it was hot, almost feverish, carrying a scent of decayed leaves and something vaguely metallic, like old pennies. I turned my head slowly, an inch at a time, and saw nothing. No owl, no squirrel, just the rough pine bark and the darkening sky. I faced forward, and the breath resumed, this time accompanied by a faint, rhythmic sound that I initially mistook for my own heartbeat, except it wasn't in my chest. It was directly behind my skull, a wet thump-thump that matched the cadence of the breath. I raised my rifle and used the scope as a mirror, angling it to see behind me. And in the curved glass, I saw a shape pressed against the trunk of the pine. Clinging to the bark like a leech, its body flattened and elongated, its head level with mine, even though it had no visible means of support. Its face was a smooth gray oval with no eyes, no nose, just a vertical slit of a mouth that was opening. And closing in time with the breathing, fired the rifle straight down to startle it, and the creature unpeeled from the tree with a wet, sucking sound and dropped to the forest floor, landing on all fours before rising to its hind legs. It stood there, easily 8 feet tall, and then it did something that broke me. It waved. A slow, gentle, almost friendly wave, its long, multi-jointed arms swaying back and forth like a neighbor greeting you from across the fence. Then it turned and melted into the trees. No sound, no footsteps, just a dissolving silhouette. I climbed down so fast, I nearly broke my ankle, and I didn't stop shaking until I was in my truck with the doors locked and the headlights painting the tree line. The next morning I went back to retrieve my stand, and at the base of the pine I found a single, human-like footprint, except the toes were too long, and the impression was far too deep for anything its size, as if it weighed 3 times what a creature that tall should weigh. Also found my scent wick, a little bottle of doe urine I used to attract bucks. And the cap was off, and the bottle was empty, and sitting next to it was a small, polished bone, warm to the touch, carved with a smile. I don't know what climbed up that tree behind me, but I know it was close enough to kiss my neck, and it chose not to. That's what scares me most, not that it could have killed me, but that it didn't. It was just curious, and I have a terrible feeling it wants to meet again. 5 hunters, 5 patches of countryside, 5 encounters with things that shouldn't exist, but clearly do. The woods don't care about your rifles, your thermals, your years of experience. They care about silence, about patience, and about the slow, steady turn of the food chain until you're no longer at the top. If these stories chilled you to the bone, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll keep bringing you true horror from the tree line, the thicket, and the hollow where the bait piles never stop. Leave a comment. Have you ever felt breath on your neck in a place where nothing could possibly be standing? Or heard your own call echoed back with just a little too much precision? I read every one, and the most haunting accounts might end up in a future video. Until next time, watch the shadows, trust your gut, and never assume you're the only hunter in the woods. Sleep tight.